Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Well, this is great. As I'm seeing people trickle in, I'm anticipating we'll need maybe 5 minutes for folks to all be here. So I'll just take a few of those to talk about some other upcoming Global PDX events. Tomorrow we have development drinks in Beaverton. As a reminder, we're testing out the Beaverton location for just 2 more months. So if you live in Beaverton and you want development drinks near you, please show up, show your support. We'd love to see some folks joining us there. We also have a full events calendar of things coming up, including other exciting lunch and learns. A reminder that if you're a Global PDX member, all of our event invites are just going to show up on your Google Calendar automatically. If you're not a member, you can still RSVP as normal. We're testing out this new system. Please let me know if you're a person who doesn't like events to show up on their calendar, and I can definitely take you off that list, but we thought it'd be great to try making that a little bit more accessible for everybody. Those are the big updates from me. So what I'd love to do is just go around the room quickly, ask everybody their name, the organization they work for, or their type of business, and what interests you about this topic today. Now, I've learned from folks in the past that sometimes introverts hate this when I do it and call them out. So I'm going to say as a pass for everybody, if you don't want to talk today, that's totally fine. Either you can include your LinkedIn in the chat or just say pass when I call you, and that's 100% okay. Sheila, I'd love to start with you.
Okay, whoops, there. Yeah, okay, I'm Sheila Walters Matsuda. I'm with GlobalPDX as a board member, but also in this case, I'm interested in hearing this for some other organizations that I work with, Rafiki Village Project and Global Service Corps. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today, Sheila. Over to Aaron.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Pina, and I run Anthropolicy, which is a human rights and equity consulting service where we help folks recenter or center equity during a high-stakes transition. I'll drop my contact info in the chat. And today I'm just trying to learn about those current funding trends, see what's going on out there in the field so I can relay that information to some of my civil society partners. So this is great. Nice to see you all.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. Tom, how about yourself? Oh, I know Tom's off camera.
Oh, sorry, I'm here. Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Bodie. I'm here with World Scholarship Initiative. I'm hoping to pick up some practical advice for relating with donors.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Callie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Callie. I'm the Executive Director of Stick Design. We focus on marketing and design for nonprofits. So I'm here to learn and glean some information for my clients as well.
Thanks, Callie. Susan.
Hi, am I muted? No. Okay, good. I'm Susan Ehrman. I'm the Development Director for World Oregon in Portland, and this is my field. So this is what I do for a living, and I'm just curious to hear some new perspectives. Thanks.
Awesome. Great to have you, Susan. Jim.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jim Presnell. I'm Executive Director of These Numbers Have Faces. We work with university students in Rwanda, and we're celebrating our 15th anniversary this month. For me, yeah, it's a big part of my job is fundraising. So looking at trends and figuring out how to connect with donors is high on my list.
Excellent. It's good to have you here, Jim. Over to Allie.
My name is Allie Petrina, and I am on the Global PDX board. I also work for Idealist Consulting, and we do software for nonprofits. And as a client success manager there, I'm always just looking to understand the perspective of donors and people within the fundraising field so that I can better support clients. So this is just kind of an information gathering moment for me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie. Chris.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Hager-Baumer. I'm Executive Director of OpenAQ. We are a platform, data platform of air quality data from all over the world. And I'm always interested in what's the latest in fundraising.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. As a reminder, some folks that might have just come in, we're doing a really quick introduction of folks who are in the room. We're just asking for your name, your organization, or the type of work that you do, and what interests you about our session today. I'll pass it over to Samita.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. My name is Samitha Reddy. I'm from Spoon, based here in Portland, Oregon, but we're a global organization focusing on malnutrition for young children. I am the director of development. I can't remember if I already said that. And I'm here to do things that are not different from what everyone else has discussed. Who doesn't want to be up on current trends, right? Yeah, that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Excellent. So good to have you today. I'll pass it to Altamush.
My name is Altamush. I'm actually an animal law LLM student at Lewis and Clark Law School. I'm originally from Pakistan, and I'm running a nonprofit back home that helps humans, animals, and the environment. And I'm just here to learn. Thank you.
We're so happy to have you today. I'll pass it over to Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm from climate science. We essentially make bite-sized content on climate change that follows scientific peer review standards. Our platform has just this year reached around 20 million people, and we work with young people all over the world, help them create climate solutions and act on climate change.
Awesome. It's great to have you, Michael. Wendy, how about yourself?
I am Wendy Prizer. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm just looking to learn more about the climate space and what is out there, and saw this pop up and it piqued my interest.
Awesome. It's great to have you today, Wendy. I'll pass it over to Trina.
Good morning. Thanks. Yeah, my name is Trina Newcomb. I am Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations on the development team at Medical Teams International. So we are a local or Portland-based nonprofit, but work internationally. And so, yeah, also like others, here to learn. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Good to have you, Trina. Becca.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Feathers. I'm an independent consultant working on access to justice, rule of law, peace negotiations, and political development. And I am here, again, like everyone, to the trends, but I'm particularly interested in hearing about trends pertaining to small doers and large donors.
Excellent. Thanks, Becca. Sarah, how about yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Yeoman. I am an independent photographer that works with mission-driven organizations and nonprofits. I'm interested in the relationships with funders and fiscal sponsors, not just for the nonprofit clients that I work for, but potentially seeing how that can overlap in the creative space and create content that way.
Awesome. It's great to have you today, Sarah. I'll do a quick reminder that if you are a GlobalPDX member, you're invited into our exclusive LinkedIn group, and everyone's LinkedIn who's here today is going to be posted after the event, so you'll be able to connect really quickly. But you're also very welcome to share your LinkedIn in this chat or direct message somebody if you're really excited to making that connection. I'd love to pass it over to Raven, who has a special plug for us today. Raven?
Hi guys, I'm Raven Walsh. I work with Green Empowerment and I'm our philanthropy director. So I also am the head of department for fundraising for an international nonprofit. So that's why I'm here for the lunch and learn portion of it. But Samita and I have been talking because we're both working in an international space, but based in Portland, like most GlobalPDX people. And as the heads of our fundraising departments, it is really nice to be able to share best practices and ask for support for like, how would you handle this, or talk about some of the challenges in our industry. And so my executive director, Andrea, has spoken so highly of the executive director group in GlobalPDX that we reached out to Jennifer to see if we could start a similar group, but for development directors or heads of fundraising for their organizations. So we are going to be doing that, and we're really excited about it. It was in your email for a couple of newsletters. So if you need the specifics about where, it's going to be in March is our first online meeting. And I believe we picked the third Tuesday at noon, trying to get like people that could just come and have a brown bag kind of situation with us. But then we're going to do an in-person so that we can have some like FaceTime in April. Samita, did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it. maybe one thing I would add is just that, you know, we would want to meet with the group and make sure the time works with everyone. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, oh, that one time doesn't work for me, that's okay. Still express your interest in the group and we'll figure something out that works for everyone.
Absolutely. Agreed. And this is a great opportunity. If you know of any people who are heads of their fundraising departments, so please let them know about this group. We at GlobalPDX really believe that sharing all of these resources is going to make all of us better and stronger in the work that we do. So please help us in sharing the word about that development, that working group. And as a reminder, everybody who's a GlobalPDX member can join any working group that is applicable to them. So my name is Jennifer Miller. I'm the initiative lead at GlobalPDX. And I'm really excited to be here because I also do some consulting. GlobalPDX isn't my only role. And I work tremendously often with nonprofits, and of course, donor retention and building those relationships is key. So I'm excited to pick up some new skills. Now I'd love to introduce our speaker today, Joanne Sonnenschein. Joanne is the founder and CEO of Connective Impact, which is a membership organization guiding international development doers with visibility, intelligence, and resources to connect with donors, and vice versa. Joanne is an expert in funding trends and a strong believer in building connections between the doers and the donors to advance development globally. And with that, I'll pass it over to Joanne.
Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see all of you today. Of course, as fate would have it, as soon as this event started, I started having like a little tickle in my throat. So if you see me reach for my water every so often, that's why. But it's really great to be here. I love having these kinds of conversations. I was a fundraiser for 5 years. Before that, I was in policy. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about my background, but the point is that I've been in your shoes. And it is not easy to figure out how to maneuver through all of the donor requirements, knowing if you're the right fit, knowing what to say if you are, what if they're not accepting, you know, unsolicited proposals, et cetera. All of the things that you mentioned that you're interested in learning about or talking about, I'm going to try to cover today. But of course, if there are points that you want to raise that I don't cover, we have about 200 members in our community. So I'm always happy to ask folks on your behalf and or respond based on my experience working with these members. So I am going to share some slides. Before I do that, you have received a link from Jennifer to sign up for this workbook. We do ask for your email because, of course, like any good organization, we have marketing emails that we then want to send you afterwards. You do not have to continue them if you don't want them. I know some have, you know, some people unsubscribe quickly. That's totally fine. But we do try to keep track of who we're talking to and kind of, you know, what type of work you're all doing. I was going to pull it up just so you can get a sense of what it looks like. And then kind of how we're going to use it in this session. So let me just show you. It looks like this. And in it, it's just a little bit of information to kind of guide you as you're thinking about your fundraising journey or whoever you work with on fundraising, and what we'll talk about today as well, including trends and priorities in funding, how your work overlaps with those trends and that we're seeing. We'll talk about, you know, how do you identify funding gaps? We'll talk a little bit about outreach, and then identifying some potential partners. So hopefully that'll be helpful to you. You don't have to use it as we're going through the session, but if you would like to, of course you can. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of the slides up. You will also have access to these slides after today. So don't feel like you have to jot everything down while I'm talking. Let me see. This is where my tech skills always get a little weird. Okay. Whoops. Let me make sure you can see. Okay. Can you see the presentation or no? Yes, I'm seeing some nodding.
Still loading for me.
Yeah, it's still loading for me too.
Okay. All right, hold on 1 second. Oh no, where'd it go? There we go. Okay, let's try it this way. Okay, can you see it without me doing the like fancy slideshow thing?
Yes.
Now can you see it still?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we're going to talk today about doers and donors. And obviously that's a little bit of a funny term because, you know, what does that really mean? I think you all kind of know this idea of doers are the ones that are really connected to the stakeholders in the developing economies that we're all working in. The work that I do with Connective Impact, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we do generally, but is with the Global South. We work with those that are kind of doing the work and connected to stakeholders. We work with those that are funding the work, and we work with corporates as well that are kind of on all sides. And what we'll talk about today is how do you build those relationships? What does that look like? How do you even figure out who to build relationships with, some outreach, et cetera, as I mentioned. So just quickly about me. So I've spent about 15 years as a fundraiser. I was the fundraiser for an NGO for 5 of those years, and the rest of the time has been a support role, either as a consultant or CEO of Connective Impact. But generally, my background is at the intersection of policy, development, sustainability, and CSR. I also have a former life as a bond originator before I got involved in all this work. And frankly, I started Connective Impact because as a fundraiser, I just felt like things weren't moving fast enough. And I felt like, SHIT wasn't getting done the way it should in order for the work to progress in an accelerated way. We've evolved over time. What started off as a consultancy really moved into this membership model that we have now. Members, there's, like I mentioned, about almost 200 spanning really every part of the globe. Those that are working in the Global South that are either looking for resources or looking for partnership strategy. And what we focus on is this idea of how do you leverage the who do you know to get noticed? How do you get those introductions? How do you know things around what funders are prioritizing? How do you even know kind of the donor type that you should be considering? And that's the type of work that we do at Connective Impact. The way that we go about this is by looking at points of intersection and this idea of mutual interest. I'm an economist, and so there's this economic term called comparative advantage. Comparative advantage basically looks like this in so many terms, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about the economic concept of it. But at the end of the day, it's really understanding your strengths and the value that you bring to a partnership or a relationship. So if you're represented by the pink/red circle and the partner or funder that you're trying to engage is represented by the blue circle, what kind of overlap will bring that green point of intersection that's really going to help advance the work that you all want to see happen? And where are your strengths going to complement the potential partner/funder strengths? And vice versa. And I like to think about it in this visual term. It's not always that easy, but the process that we take at Connective Impact is to figure that out. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I will have time at the end for questions and discussion. I don't want this just to be me like talking at you, but also feel free to jump questions in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on it, or Jennifer, feel free to interrupt me if I'm going too fast. So how do we make this happen? The first thing we need to do is figure out what you're doing. What are you funding? What are your priorities? And what I wanted to do to kind of orient you to that thinking is talk a little bit about what we're seeing currently. So as you're putting together your priorities as an organization, I always say, don't try to fit your square peg in the round hole. Don't try to create priorities based on what others are funding or doing. But it is important to kind of know how funders are thinking about the current trends so that you can articulate your work in those concepts. You're not changing what you're doing, but you're just kind of reorienting the focus or the lens. So what are some of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now? And some of this isn't going to be surprising. I included Mackenzie Scott because every one of our members reaches out to me and asks, how do they get Mackenzie Scott funding? For those of you who don't know, Mackenzie Scott is Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. She got a boatload of money from him and during their marriage, and she has basically said, I want to give it all away. And so organizations are receiving like $10 million at a time, kind of out of the blue, because Mackenzie Scott has warranted that their organization is worth it, is doing work that she believes is meaningful, and that they would benefit from a lot of money that's unrestricted and flexible, which means they can pretty much do whatever they want with it. And what this is doing is this is really pushing funders of all types to start thinking about flexible funding and to start thinking about their approaches to funding. It's also pushing nonprofits to figure out how they tap into this type of funding. And I can talk about some tips and tricks that we've learned in a bit, but one thing I will just say is that Mackenzie Scott uses the web. She Googles, she has her teams Google organizations that are doing great work around women, or, you know, around, she's really interested in local community building, and looks at their websites and determines if, you know, they fit her interests solely based on that. And it really doesn't go much deeper, to be perfectly honest. She will ask for some information on finances, but not a ton. Some of our members have gotten Mackenzie Scott funding, and it's been really shocking just how little in depth she goes, but she's funding really amazing groups. And so whatever she's doing right. She does have a website now called yieldgiving.org, and that's a database of all of the funding she's put out there. And down the road, she has said that she will start putting more information about both how she's going to fund and requests for proposals. So we can come back to Mackenzie Scott, but kind of in line with this idea of flexible funding is localization. And what do I mean by that? Donors want to know that the money that they're putting out there is getting as close to quote unquote the customer as possible. So the problems that exist out there are obviously very relevant locally. They're very specialized and niche. And donors want to make sure that the funding isn't going to organizations that are spending it on a ton of overhead, unfortunately, or that are spending it on like conferences and workshops and all this stuff. They want the money to go to those who need it. So there's this big push to start funding smaller organizations that are very niche focused, that have strong local ties to government, to other decision makers like chiefs or indigenous peoples, depending on where the work is happening. And not funding some of the bigger NGOs as much for some of the work that can be done locally. This obviously is a little bit different when it comes to like big systems change funding, but localization is taking hold pretty strongly, even with the USAIDs of the world. The other thing we've seen is donors take a step back and really think about their strategies. So this year actually is a bit of a pause year for a lot of donors, particularly in the philanthropic space, as they figure out this kind of post-COVID new generation of like localization, flexible funding, the type of work they want to be doing, not funding everything, but like really focusing. And so you're starting to see some donors that had funded, you know, really different issues or trends moving into different areas, which is really been interesting to watch. Women-led work, particularly, you know, in places where the work needs to happen. So I call them stakeholders. I don't like saying in the field because I think it does bring about this colonization concept, which we're trying to move away from, but this idea of proximate leadership being led by women, by those that understand what's happening in the environments where they live and work and function. Plus also making sure that women are at the heart of a lot of project design. That's becoming a very big priority for a lot of donors, as is climate. So a couple of you mentioned climate. Climate change everything is really what we're seeing a lot of donors focusing on. So this idea of resilience and, you know, creating environments so that communities that are impacted by economic shocks or environment shocks can manage those shocks with their own resources. So you're starting to see, a lot of focus on climate. And then the last kind of big trend, and I'm going to just dive a bit deeper on trends in a minute, is risk aversion. So not taking such big risks on concepts that donors aren't familiar with, but again, drilling down on things they know, understand, feel comfortable with, feel attached to. Just a couple of more, you know, examples of what we're seeing here. You obviously see Mackenzie Scott here. Jack Dorsey has a really interesting, he's the founder of Twitter, approach to giving. He has like a Google sheet that he uses and people can put ideas into the Google sheet and he decides what he's going to fund with very large unrestricted funding. I only know a couple of people who have gotten funding from him, but that's been a really interesting approach. And I think we're going to start to see this idea of very rich people funding, you know, with a lot of money in kind of simple ways. So that's something to keep an eye on. Women are taking hold of their agency and saying, you know, we want to put money into causes, into programs that we believe are going to shift the narrative and also shift the paradigm. You're going to see more of that, and you're going to see more women donor networks like Million Lives Club. This woman here is part of the Women Donors Network. We work with a couple called Women Rise. And there's another one, sorry, Together Women Rise. There's another one called Women Win. So like, you're going to see more of that. Ukraine is still going to be high priority. Disaster relief has taken a little bit of a backseat, even with the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, given how donors are trying to figure out what kind of to use their resources for. And you're starting to see more corporate donations for disaster response in the philanthropic sector really backing up and being more holistic in how their funding systems change. And then lastly, one resource that I love referring to as I'm looking at trends is the Council for Effective Philanthropy. They put out this really great analysis of Mackenzie Scott giving. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Mental health. So being is a collaboration between a number of donors looking at the idea of mental health as a development issue. We're seeing funders look at the intersection of mental health and climate, and also mental health and livelihoods, which is, I think a really unique and different type of perspective. And then a couple of other resources here. Bond is a UK-based organization that looks at funding trends. They do tend to be a little bit more like European and UK focused, but if you don't follow Bond, I would. They put out great trend analyses on the site, on kind of what donors are funding. In this particular instance, it was on flexibility and localization. And I wanted to mention Ford Foundation, which has been leading a collaborative kind of discussion around increasing indirect cost rates. They're now moving their indirect cost rate up to 25%, which is pretty high. And they're encouraging other donors to look at this idea of unrestricted funding and flexibility. They are part of a program called Edge Funders, I think it is, where they're kind of trying to figure out how collaboratively they can really move the needle on this idea of more unrestricted giving, bigger funding. Anyway, something to keep an eye on. And then lastly, as we're talking about climate and talking about trends, climate finance, climate innovation, this idea of using technology to make the climate investments have a higher financial ROI. This program called The Lab, which is funded by a couple of donors, including USAID, for example, put out a call late last year looking for climate innovation ideas. And you're going to start to see more of these award programs or innovation programs pop up. We see a lot of them and we track them. And I think they're really interesting and give you an opportunity to test some things out. So just to kind of close out on some of these trends, climate is about resiliency. I mentioned responding to shocks, but also looking at this intersection, like I said, with mental health, but also how women are involved. How do women control how decisions are made that are impacted by climate or will impact their climate? This idea of localization, I think I kind of refer to that also. One thing I always encourage our members to think about is how their work impacts job creation and market development. Funders, as they're investing in different programs, want to see that the ROI is there from an economic development perspective. And right now they're measuring that quite a bit by things like how are young people having access to a future that's lucrative, or how many jobs have been created, what type of markets have been created that weren't there before. How do you measure market development and things like that? Shocks, managing conflict, other types of shocks, different types of collaboration. One thing I didn't talk about, which is the private sector engagement with other funders, how private sector actors are coming in as the enablers for things like job creation, for helping governments create long-term sustainability in their investments. You're going to see more of that. And then this idea of focusing at the niche level. As funders are thinking about more flexibility, they're going to want to do so with that idea of niche funding and niche programming in mind. Okay. Oops. So that's a lot. I know I just talked really fast, and I did that on purpose because there's a lot going on right now. But when you look at this big universe of potential, as you're thinking about the work that you do, I'm sure based on what I said, there are a couple of things that stood out to you and you thought, okay, well, this is what we do in that context of resilience, or this is what we do to build market systems. pick a couple, and you can use your workbook to kind of jot those down, but think about like, how do you set yourself apart in terms of your program delivery? Then what you're going to think to yourself about is, okay, how do we really like drill down into gaps for funding needs and where we are going to want to connect with donors? So I like to think about it in terms of what's working really well that you might want to replicate or grow, what's kind of not working so great that maybe you need some support with just to kind of augment, and then where are the real gaps that you feel like if you had 200K tomorrow, your programs would really accelerate. So that's where you kind of move next into funding gaps. And as you're thinking about connecting to funders, it's really important that you can articulate not just your program priorities and how they overlap with a funder's program priorities, and we'll talk about that a bit as we move into outreach, but also what it really is going to take to deliver on your program priorities. Do I see a question in here? Oh, okay, thanks, Jennifer. So is it going to take more time, more money, more, different types of partnerships, what, relationship building, and start kind of, whoops, oh no, yeah, I'm right here. Okay. What kind of resources will you need to fill those gaps in so that you can advance your program priorities? And the reason why it's important to start thinking about it in terms of these kind of short, medium, and longer term windows is because certain funders are going to only fund you according to specific issues, geographies, and timelines. You might not be able to get a 12-month fund to fill in your gap from a philanthropic funder, but you might from a corporate funder. But if you're talking to like a USAID or a Gates Foundation, 3 to 5 year windows is more common. So as you are narrowing in on where you really have funding priorities and gaps, this will also help you figure out who your prospect list is, because you want to start thinking about the kind of universe of potential donors by some certain criteria. And one of them is how long they fund for and how they fund. The other thing you want to think about is what resources you already have that you can bring to a partnership with a donor. So is there in-kind support that you can bring in as match? Are there other funders that are funding a program that you have that you can say to a new funder, hey, if you want to kind of join forces with us, we've already got this XYZ funder that's giving us 200K for this geography, but we really want to build this in 3 geographies so we can share lessons learned. Can you contribute 200 to 400K to allow us to do that? And then you're part of the growth and the learning exercise. I always say overestimate by 10% at least. So a lot of times NGOs will say, well, our funding gap is 200K. Yeah, but let's be honest, like that doesn't probably account for some of your overhead or some other types of expenses that you could potentially have. Do not be shy by concerns that a funder isn't going to fund you because of your budget. If a funder wants to fund you because you are a fit for them, they might say you need to lower your budget. But that isn't going to be what totally, draws them away from you. What draws funder away from you purely is about fit. I talk to funders all day long and they will say they are not a fit because of X, not because their budget is too high. They might say they're too big, they're not local enough, or they work too much with this type of group or whatever, but it's never about budget. So, looking at this kind of short-term, medium-term, long-term funding needs, that then becomes, these gap fillers that you're going to use to find funders to fill those gaps. So then how do you start identifying prospects and partners? So this is where comparative advantage is really important. There's certain ways, of course, that you can learn about the funders that are out there. You could do your, Google research, and everyone has access to different subscription models. At Connective Impact, we have a donor intel database. We put out, weekly funding calls. But what's going to be really important is not just what's the universe of funders out there. It's going to be where is there an opportunity for us to have a comparative advantage with a funder? So how can we provide value to that funder if they're going to fund us? And at the same time, they're providing value to us with resources. But what is that mutuality? That's something that you want to start kind of nailing in when you are making your prospect list. It's not just about, oh yeah, they funded this program before, so they're going to fund it again. Or, they seem to fund climate issue. MacArthur Foundation seems to fund climate, so let's reach out to them. If you do your research and really think, what does MacArthur Foundation fund around climate and where, and what type of organization are they looking for? And how is our work going to round out their portfolio? Where do you see commonalities and an opportunity to kind of fit in the gaps that maybe they've identified? So that's really important as you're looking at the universe of potential funders. I also require our members to think about fundraising as partnership building. So it's not just about, a transaction. This is why I left fundraising, because I felt like it was so transactional, when in reality, it's about relationship building. And a big part of finding new donors is thinking about partnerships. So these are just a couple of examples of partnering ideas that we share with our members, thinking about who else is working in regions you're working in. I'm sure you probably hear this all the time. With the big localization push, how can your organization become maybe more of a prime actor versus a sub, and vice versa? If you don't know that terminology, stop me and I can talk about it, but it tends to be kind of those that are taking big funding and subbing it out versus being like a subcontractor to a big program. How can you leverage your partners' relationships to attract new and diverse donors? How can you learn from each other, make introductions with for each other with different types of donors? And this idea of incorporating climate into your work, if it's not already a key part of your work and you think there is an entry point to bring climate in some way, you should do that, because then you'll become a little bit more attractive to donors that are in that space, as donors are really building out their climate portfolios. And same with women's leadership. We actually have members who, don't have women board members and have brought women onto their boards in order to augment their leadership. This idea of kind of market development, private sector models, if you have programs that you can, kind of build out that have that type of element, that's something you might want to think about. But if you don't, then where can you partner to kind of build in that market building element to a program that you have? And then as we move further and further away, quote unquote, from COVID, this idea of making sure that different types of partners and donors are seeing your work and having an opportunity to understand it and be closer to it. Okay, outreach. So once you've identified potential donors, I'm going to put my earphones in because my husband's making lunch and I get distracted because I'm right by the kitchen. So bear with me 1 second. So once you've identified your prospects, how do you start reaching out to them? It's not that simple that donors are going to have email form and they're going to pay attention to every email that comes in, or that you're going to be able to send a cold email and he'll write back. Like, that doesn't happen very often. It's not easy to be in front of donors one-on-one all the time. So we always say it really does take time, consistency, and patience. And in this process we talked about before of identifying your priorities, thinking about your funding gaps, thinking about that overlap and this idea of partnership, that creates your foundation. That creates the type of mechanism that you want to use to kind of churn out ideas. But then you have to be consistent in how you present those ideas to potential donors. Okay, so how do you even know whether it's worth reaching out to a donor? Most donors will say, well, go to our website. So let's look at Ford Foundation's website. They actually do a really good job of making it easier to know if they're going to be a fit or not, because they'll include, thematic issues that they're funding. You also can go into their grants database, see who they funded in the past. Ford Foundation also shows you regions of priority. One thing we've learned is that this changes very often. So before you do anything with a funder, go to their website and make sure that you have accurate information, because they'll get really irritated if you haven't done that before you reach out. I know from experience. The other cool thing about, some foundations is they'll put their staff on their website. And so Ford Foundation actually has information about who is managing what on their website. Use that. And if you feel like Ford Foundation is the right fit for you, send an email to a program staff person and ask. And, they're probably not going to get back to you right away. But we always say there's a follow-up cadence. We actually have a donor outreach blueprint mini course that we sell. And in that blueprint, we talk about the cadence of outreach, emailing, with this kind of blurb about how to introduce yourself so that they notice, following up after 2 weeks, then after 3 weeks, then after 1 week. And like, what do you say in those follow-ups? There is an approach to making sure that you are communicating through email in a way that donors are going to pay attention. I feel like social media is a great place to track what donors are funding. They put RFPs up there. They'll put information on who they're funding. On their websites, they almost always have examples of who they're giving grants to. But pay attention. This is where you can start to get a sense of who is funding what and where you fit in. So as I was mentioning, as you're thinking about kind of cold outreach email, do not be shy. I've had experiences where members will say to us like, oh, really? We should send an email if they don't reach out to us first. And it's like, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I always say in my emails, I'm just trying to grab a few minutes to get a sense of your work based, a little bit more than what's on your website. We're really interested in partnership. We want to share with you some ideas we've had and see if maybe they're similar with the ideas you've had. We follow up constantly. I mean, if you don't hear back in a few months, you can move on, but like I am incessant. You do not stop reaching back out and saying, yeah, I'm still wanting to chat with you about this. Like it has to be incessant because they don't pay attention unless they really see that there's a reason for them to pay attention, which is where the value add piece comes in, the comparative advantage piece, and that there's a benefit for them. These are all, inside these donor organizations are all people who are trying to do their job the best way they can. And you have an opportunity to help them do that. So it's good to articulate that in your email. I won't go through this in great detail. We have a proposal writing simplified email course where we talk a little bit about like what does simple proposal writing look like. Just a couple high level points here is that funders will not read long documents, like full stop. So really well written, short snippets. Do not send large documents to donors unless they ask, please. Really simple, appeal to what you think they care about. Do your research on this, the prioritization piece, explain how you're going to be valuable to them. That's how you're going to get their attention. Here are a couple of other thoughts you could try that we've seen work depending on the donor. Sharing your successes is tough. You don't want to be like, braggadocious about it, but you can just say like, hey, FYI, I wanted to share this with you. This was really exciting. We were able to reach 30,000 students in 3 geographies in 1 year. Happy to share more if you're interested. Or on the challenges side, we had a really tough time getting the government of Bangladesh to pay attention to this health initiative, but we managed to, and now we're in 75 clinics across 3 regions. Like, love to hear your thoughts on that. Asking for advice, that's a little tricky, but kind of, in the same vein, positioning them as the expert and saying, we've got an interest in hearing more about how you approach XYZ issue. Would you be open to sharing with us or sharing with our board? Or, we at Connective Impact, we do donor Q&As every month where donors come and talk about their work, how they fund, et cetera. And you'd be surprised, like donors are really open to doing that. They want to reach new audiences, so it doesn't hurt to ask. And then for existing donors in particular, sharing how leadership changes are affecting, your priorities, sharing with them kind of the latest data that you have, reaching out at least every month should be to those that are on your prospect list with something, some element of what's on here or other things. Just keep it short, keep it high level, and try to keep it pretty impactful. Plug, obviously, for Connective Impact. We've got a number of resources for fundraisers on our resources page if you ever wanted to take a look. And then some more plugging. We've got a few upcoming events. We've got Div coming up this week for members, Walmart Foundation, Tide, Siegel Family Foundation. Of course, our membership is something that we really are proud of for fundraisers, and happy to share more about that, of course. And there's my email. You're welcome to reach out anytime. So I know I just said a lot, but I wanted to have time for Q&A and discussion as well. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Joanne. That was jam-packed with so much good information. I'm sure we have some questions out there. Anyone want to kick us off?
I have
Raven.
a question I can ask. So I recently attended a webinar to get an idea of what people are doing with events now, like the transition from being either virtual or hybrid and going to in person or not. Like, I'm curious how many of your clients are dealing with that and what your opinion is on that.
A lot of them are. By the way, thank you so much for the question, Raven. And I just put the slides link in the chat so that you can have access to them anytime you'd like. So it's interesting because a lot of our members do donor visits. So they'll bring donors, either existing donors or prospective donors, to visit some of their programs approximately. And obviously those stopped during COVID, but those are starting back up again, actually at a pretty decent pace. I've participated in one, I'm going on another one in the fall, and I think that's going to continue to grow. Donors want to see the work, but also donors are starting to hire staff more locally. And so what'll happen is that those local staff will participate in events and then make recommendations to the board, or, back up in HQ, or donors are creating local boards and local staff. And so the in-person events or in-person meetings is much more regional than international. And I think you'll start to see that trend take off.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we're resuming our donor travel in July, going to Uganda to visit some of our projects there. And we were also considering, like, how do we launch this? But we did, and there has been a lot of enthusiasm for it. It feels like people are ready.
I think so. And I think COVID made us realize yes, you can learn about the work, but it's still really important to meet the communities and talk to people and be together and make decisions together.
Chris, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I appreciate your running through all of those trends, Joanne. Super helpful. Also helpful. I'm persistent with folks I know. I'm always a little reticent to be that persistent with folks I don't know. So that was really helpful to hear that. My question is about, you really focused on foundation fundraising. Would you say that your tips are similar when it comes to seeking maybe like general support from corporations, not necessarily support for an event, but like, we believe this corporation matches us and might be interested in funding us?
Yeah. So I should have said a lot of the funding that we work on is philanthropic. We do work with corporates as well as governments, but we don't work with high net worth individuals. So I can speak to kind of any funder group, but that corporates are interesting right now. We're seeing, I think, some merging of interests inside corporate. So whereas before there was like a very kind of firewall type break between the philanthropic side and the corporate side, that has started to crumble. And the impact projects or impact work is now really kind of bridging both sides, both the foundation side and the corporate side. Because of that, a lot of the corporate money handlers that we're talking to are trying to figure out how any type of giving they make is going to have a business impact. So it's a little bit similar in that ROI needs to be there, whether it's environmental, social, or economic. There does need to be return on their investment. It has to be pretty clear. The overlap of interest has to be there. But even more than that, there needs to be a very clear sense that their engagement as a funder is going to lead to something that they can calculate. And in pretty short order, I would say other funders tend to have longer timeframes and a little bit more patience than some of the corporate funding right now. And corporates are trying to figure out how they're going to operate in some of these spaces right now, particularly in climate. And they're rushing to address GHG issues and greenwashing issues and things like that. And so because of that, they're making funding decisions that will help with that. But then in 6 months, it could be very different. So that's why theirs is a little bit more short-termism.
Thanks.
I have a question for you, Joanne. I've seen a lot of nonprofits considering when's the right time to redo their website. And what you've said today, I think is really important and impactful in thinking about how much that website is a statement piece. But I also am definitely considerate of the fact that a new website takes that funding. Do you have a good sense of sort of the cart and the horse on that one?
Redo your websites. Now is the time. I actually was going to write a LinkedIn post about this tomorrow because I had a member who's pretty well funded actually. And they were interested in working with a funder that we have a relationship with. And the funder basically said, I cannot tell what they do from their website. I'm not interested. And this happens a lot. And the NGO is kind of like, well, let's send them this one pager that describes it, or let's send them this blurb that talks more about it. And the funder's already lost interest. We can't get them back. So, the website has to be, and taking a step back, I'm not a communications person, but I also would say, don't just throw everything on your website. But if you look at some of the really well-funded organizations, like go look and see who Mackenzie Scott funded because they use their websites. Organizations like Village Enterprise, MyAgro, and One Acre Fund, they are getting funded by everybody. What is it about their websites that tell the story? Last Mile Health is another one. MUSO is another organization that gets well funded. So why does their Shafco, which is a local Kenyan-based NGO that has gotten Mackenzie Scott funding, they got Audacious Project funding. They are locally run and operated. They're kind of the darling right now. So I would go to Shafco's website and see how they're talking about it. But yes, it's so worth it.
Awesome. That's good to know. Thank you. Any other questions out there for Joanne?
You're always welcome to reach out to me afterwards if you have any questions. And
how do you spell the name of the organization that you just mentioned?
Shafco here. Shafco.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
You're
and thank you again
welcome.
so much for sharing this expertise. It's really clear that Connective Impact has a lot of crossover with GlobalPDX's interests and then the interests of our members. So I definitely encourage everybody to go check out their website and see how you can be more connected with Connective Impact. Before I let everybody go, I would love to pass it over to Raven and Samita one more time, just to hear a little bit more about their thoughts on how all of these great conversations can be continued through the working group that they're building.
Samita, do you want to go first or?
Yeah, sure. I think, this conversation and Joanne leading us in this discussion, it's a really good example of like giving us some foundations and some principles to go off of. And then if we had time to stay around for another 30 minutes right now, it would be wonderful to kind of talk about how to apply these principles really practically to our work. And so that's the kind of, I think, I would want to focus on kind of the very practical application of some of these principles and other principles that we're hearing about now. And so if this leaves you, hungry for more taking action in your day-to-day, I think a development directors group is probably the right place for you.
The only other thing I would add is that we are really designing this to be a safe space so that there's an expectation of confidentiality, so that if you do have anything that's challenging within your organization, that you could bring this to that group for problem solving and like help with what would be a strategy to move forward. And so that's really attractive to me, just because I'm implementing some policy changes and being able to be like, what would you do in this situation? Knowing that like it's somebody that's experienced and also going to like hold that and respect that as confidential, that's really interesting to me too. So I hope that you will join us. I hope that feels valuable to other members of this group.